Hillary Clinton was over 2 hours late this morning giving her concession speech. Some people actually say she was about 10 hours late because she sent John Podesta in her place last night instead of taking that stage herself. But this morning she apologized to supporters, saying she was sorry she didn't win. Take a look.
This is not the outcome we wanted or we worked so hard for.
Hillary Clinton was over 2 hours late this morning giving her concession speech. Some people actually say she was 10 hours late because she sent John Podesta in her place last night instead of taking that stage herself. But this morning, she apologized to her supporters, saying she was sorry she didn't win. Take a look.
This is not the outcome we wanted or we worked so hard for, and I'm sorry that we did not win this election for the values we share and the vision we hold for our country. I feel pride and gratitude for this wonderful campaign that we built together. This vast, diverse, creative, unruly, energized campaign.
Now, there are really two schools of thought on this. The first, that Donald Trump's victory last night is a referendum on Obama's policies the past 8 years. The second, that Trump's victory is a referendum on Hillary's corruption. I mean, she's a terrible representation of the Democratic Party. I've been saying that for weeks now. So what happens then for the Democrats? With me now to answer that is history professor and author of Obama's America, A Transformative Vision of Our National Identity, Ian Reifowitz. Ian, thanks for being here.
Always a pleasure, Liz. Thank you.
And thanks for staying up so late with us last night. My goodness, did that keep us up late. 3 a.m.
Oh, my God, absolutely.
All right, today, let's talk about this, though. Like I said, there are kind of two schools of thought on Donald Trump's victory here. One side says it's a referendum on Obama's policies from the last 8 years. The other says that it's a referendum on Hillary's corruption. What do you make of this? Break it down.
Well, Liz, if you would indulge me just for a quick second. Last night we discussed a clip of Obama that only included half his answer. I just wanted to mention the other part that wasn't included. And I'll quote this. What is important is for Latino citizens to make your voice heard, because you're not just speaking for yourself. You're speaking for family members, friends, classmates of yours in school who may not have a voice, who can't legally vote. So when we discussed whether or not he had encouraged undocumented immigrants to vote, it's very clear that he said that they cannot legally vote. I think that's an important thing for us to discuss.
Sure.
In any kind of election campaign or media discussion, because this is what we see very often. People hear this and then they say to themselves, wow, I didn't hear that from my mainstream media sources. Is the mainstream media biased against conservatives? Well, no, they didn't report that because it didn't happen. The quote the clip that you played was from Fox. I know it's not your quote, your clip. It was from Fox News, Neil Cavuto, and he was outraged about what the president said, but the president didn't say those things.
Right. Let me just remind our viewers quickly so that they can follow along with this conversation. Last night during election coverage, Ian and I were talking about Florida vote and the Latino vote in Florida, and we were talking about illegal immigrants voting. There was a clip that was making the rounds on the internet. We introduced it like that last night. We said that people were very outraged that President Obama seemingly encouraged illegal immigrants to vote, that he answered with ambiguity was the word that I used last night. Now Ian is saying that he read the entire quote, saw it all in context, and he doesn't feel that way. But something else, I'm actually glad you brought this up, because after we were done talking last night, of course we had a limited amount of time. You know, I was thinking about what you said about voter fraud and how you said it wasn't rampant, it wasn't widespread, it wasn't large enough. It wasn't widespread enough to sway the election. And it brought to my mind the James O'Keefe videos where Scott Fovel, who of course was a Democratic operative employed by both the Hillary Clinton campaign and the Democratic National Committee, he was talking about the fact that voter fraud as an institution, as an operation, as something that happens regularly, was something that was regularly practiced by the Democratic Party for the last 50 years. And I'm glad you brought this up, because I wanted to ask you, how can you hear that video, hear that accusation from Scott Fovel, hear that it's really his bragging, and then say that it's not widespread or it's not common?
Because the Scott Fovel video didn't happen the way that it was portrayed in the media. James O'Keefe has already been proven to present things in a false way. He deceptively edits videos. Acorn,
No, Acorn, he didn't get in trouble for deceptively editing. He got in trouble because California is a one-party state. In a one-party state, it means when you're making a recording of someone, you have to have your permission and their permission, and he did not have their permission. That's differing from a two-party state where you don't have to have their permission. He never got in trouble for deceptively editing the Acorn video.
Whether or not he got in trouble with the law, he got in trouble with the public for lying. He showed a video that he was sitting in a chair with somebody dressed as a pimp. That is an outtake that he made with himself. He wasn't dressed as a pimp when he was sitting there with these people. I can quote you, without going into too much detail, 8 different ways that he lied in the Acorn video. So no, I don't believe anything that is presented by James O'Keefe, just in the same way that this video that we talked about last night only told half the story. If I could see raw footage of everything they have on Scott Fogle, then I could tell you what I think of it. Until then,
why did they fire Scott Fogle then? They fired him. They fired him. They let him go. They said they didn't want him part of their team. They disavowed him. Why did they do that if it was misrepresented?
To end the story. To end the story. We don't know what the raw video says because we won't see the raw video because James O'Keefe doesn't release the raw video.
What news network does though? I mean, when you think about stories, when you think about media, who airs an hour and a half of video that's not necessary to the story? Don't we all butt things together to make just the crux of the story palatable to viewers?
Put it up on his website. Anybody can go see it. But James O'Keefe isn't a journalist. James O'Keefe is an activist. James O'Keefe is a provocateur, and I'm sure he'd be happy to be called that. So I want to see those raw videos before I accept anything that was said there. But just with President Obama last night, when you play half the tape, it sounds ambiguous. When you play the whole tape, it's unambiguous. He said illegal, undocumented immigrants cannot vote legally. So that's not what Neil Cavuto on Fox said that he said. You didn't accuse him of saying that. You used the right terms. You talked about ambiguity. But what the story going around was something very different. And when people hear that and don't understand why the mainstream media isn't reporting it, and then Donald Trump says, oh, the mainstream media is biased, and you put all these things together, you get an election where Hillary Clinton wins the popular vote, but because of a few thousand people and a few thousand people here in Wisconsin and Michigan, you have elected President Trump.
Right. Well, I think some of Donald Trump, and this isn't just exclusive to Donald Trump, I think some of the American people's skepticism of the mainstream media or their accusations of bias stem from the things we found out in WikiLeaks. That Donna Brazile, when she was employed by CNN, that she leaked debate questions to Hillary Clinton, or we see Katie Couric deceptively editing, very apropos for this conversation, deceptively editing a gun documentary to purport her own gun control agenda. We see the bias. It's not just Donald Trump making these accusations and a bunch of people following along. We can see it for ourselves. But just going back to the voter fraud thing for a second, this election, I think, is a perfect example of why even small amounts of voter fraud could make a difference. I mean, the New Hampshire race for Senate was just called this afternoon. It was just called something like 70 votes different. The popular vote in the presidential election right now is sitting at just a difference of 200,000 votes. When you break this down into county, some of these counties don't have very many people in them. The counties count for electoral votes more even than the popular vote here. When you get down to these nitty-gritty numbers, a couple dozen instances of voter fraud could make a difference. Ian, for the integrity of your vote, my vote, all Democrat votes, all Republican votes, we need to not discount this. We need to pay attention to it. We need to investigate it. It's only fair. We owe it to the American people.
What we also owe to the American people is to make sure that we don't prevent people from voting who have the legal right to do so and who wish to do so. And every indication is that if you look at the number of people who are prevented from voting by restrictive voter ID laws, people who have the right to vote but who maybe don't have a birth certificate or can't get a day off on the one day in the month that the county clerk is open 3 counties away, we're losing more legal votes by a factor of 1,000 than we are preventing illegal votes. So to me, that's really the real voter fraud, is voter suppression.
But shouldn't we address that as a separate issue? Shouldn't we address that access? Shouldn't we try to get people access to these resources as the first step in solving voter fraud then? Because if we solved those things, if we solved those problems and people could have easy access to the credentials, the identification that they needed, and that wasn't an issue anymore, wouldn't that then be a good solution to preventing voter fraud, to have those IDs in place?
That would be a great solution, and if we could do both of those things, it would be wonderful. But we've been instituting restrictive voter ID laws, and we haven't been giving the people they need the resources. When you take what's the word, a mallet, and to try to destroy a crumb, you're going to knock out the whole table. Better to leave the crumb there if those are your only two choices. But the better approach would be to do what you said, which is to do both of those things. But we're not seeing it. We're seeing Republicans in states when they're caught on microphones or whatever saying, well, we're going to institute these voter ID laws because it's going to help Republicans win. That's not what voter ID laws are supposed to do. And I know you don't think that that's what they're supposed to do.
Right. And we also know that there are a lot of states that are trying to institute these types of solutions. New York, for example, Mayor de Blasio gave out free ID cards for those people who didn't have them. And there's not even voter ID laws in New York right now. But I guess the crux of the matter is, to me, Ian, sometimes it's that crumb that you mentioned that makes the difference in the election. Those small amount of votes, your vote, my vote, they matter. We're not just one vote lost in the masses. They make a difference. They decide presidential elections, Senate races, governor races. I mean, our individual votes make a difference, and we need to protect the integrity of that vote. Ian, I'd love to continue talking about this to us. This always happens to us. They're telling me in my ear that I gotta wrap up, but I'll talk to you again next week. Our next tipping point with former Congressman Bob Inglis. The past 8 years about to be rolled back. Stick with us. That's straight ahead.